Great. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Bonifaz. I'm the president of Free Speech for People. We're pleased to have you join us for this town hall on the New York Democracy Preservation Act. We have an exciting lineup today, and this is going to be a very important discussion on a critical and bold reform on campaign finance that is pending now in the New York legislature. We're going to first hear from Senator Michael Gianaris, the Deputy Majority Leader in the New York State Senate, who's the lead sponsor on this model legislation. Following him, we will hear from Zephyr Teachout, Fordham law professor and a champion for democracy. We will then have video remarks that Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland has prepared for this event tonight, a member of the House Judiciary Committee. And then we will close out with remarks from Free Speech for People's campaign director, Alexandra Flores Quilty. I want to thank our co-sponsors for this event with Free Speech for People are the Empire State Indivisible, as well as the Center for American Progress. So I want to turn over to our first speaker, Senator Gianaris. Thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you, John. Thank you to Free Speech for People and my co-sponsors, my friends at Empire State Indivisible, and of course, Center for American Progress and the illustrious Zephyr Teachout. It's always a pleasure to share a space with her on the important issues of the day. This is quite a innovative way, I think, of tackling a problem we've been dealing with for many years. Ever since the days of the Citizens United decision, we've been trying to figure out how do we get corporate money out of our politics as much as possible when the Supreme Court has basically said we can't. And so this is a model that builds upon existing court precedent where you are allowed to prohibit and restrict the ability of foreign entities to participate in our democratic process for obvious reasons. And as it turns out, a lot of the big corporations that exist in our country in this modern economy have substantial foreign investment, foreign ownership as part of their companies. And so what this legislation proposes is that if there is an entity that has a single foreign individual with greater than 1% ownership in a company, or multiple foreign entities that can constitute 5% or more of corporate ownership, then that entity would be prohibited from participating in elections, from spending, whether through direct contributions or contributions to PACs or through independent expenditures. They would be out of the ball game and would require substantial certification to make sure that that anyone that is participating does not meet those qualifications. Now, you might ask, what does that mean? Which companies would fall under that definition and which wouldn't? Well, there was a survey of over 100 companies within the S&P 500, and it turns out that 98% of those companies have 5% or more foreign ownership. It's just a matter of fact as we deal with big companies in this modern economy that there's a lot of foreign money flowing into them. So what we fundamentally do is take those big corporations out of the game, off the table, so their level of influence would be lessened. A lot of the times, their participation takes the form of trying to influence ballot initiatives or through dark money in campaigns, not direct money. And so that would also be prohibited. As we mentioned, sometimes it's very specific. You know, you had Amazon, my good friends at Amazon. I say that with great sarcasm, but they tried to scuttle a tax that the City Council of Seattle was trying to implement, and they actually tried to take out individual council people through a pact that they had set up. So that's the kind of thing we're trying to stop from happening. Entities that clearly have a biased interest in the policymaking, whether it's a locality or a state or even national government, essentially trying to buy these elections through their great wealth and influence. And so we're trying to do this. It is fairly innovative in the nation. I believe Seattle itself has done something like this, not surprisingly, and St. Petersburg and Florida are two places that have done it. It's not in place in any state as far as we know, and hopefully New York will become the first one to do this if we can pass it through both houses before our session ends, which is coming up. June 10th is our last day of scheduled session. And it's my intention to try and do what we can to get it across the finish line in New York before then. And hopefully it's not just take care of the problem within New York, but also serve as a model for other places to follow this example. Perhaps even the federal government, that would be wonderful if they went down this direction. So I'm happy to be here and to answer any questions that may arise from any of the attendees. But I don't want to take up the time to hear from our other panelists. And John, thank you again for organizing this and putting us together. And I look forward to success.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator, so much. And we really are thrilled with your leadership on this in New York. And we do think that New York can be the first state in the country to lead, following on the victory in Seattle in January 2020, where this bill was passed, and St. Petersburg before that. And I think we'll hear more from Alexandra on how people can get involved to help support the senator and this bill in New York and to help get it passed. I also want to say, before we go to Zephyr Teach Out, that if you have a question this evening, please, if you're on the Zoom call, please feel free to write that in the Q&A box and we will try to answer your questions. If you're watching on Facebook, please feel free to make a comment and put the question in the comment section. We'll have them brought over to this Zoom conversation and try to answer that way as well. So our next speaker is Zephyr Teach Out, a Fordham Law professor, a preeminent champion on democracy in this country, and we're thrilled to have her join us this evening as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be here. I think this is a really important moment and a really important bill. And we're in the middle of a real democratic revival in New York, and Senator Gianaris has been at the forefront of that, both in terms of taking on, in really hard ways, the direct attacks from big corporate spending, and also in terms of expanding the franchise and building out the ways in which people can be involved. And I think it would be just an extraordinary moment for New York, which had a really different legislative session this year, where you saw a lot more involvement, you saw a lot more leadership from the representative houses to sort of have a capstone of New York leading on fighting against corporate foreign money in our elections. So it's a big deal. And getting people involved is going to be really, really critically important. I want to emphasize a few different things, underlining some of the things that Mike already talked about. But one is that, we have been since 1976, really, when you look sort of back at the constitutional history, living in a constitutional structure where the courts have been increasingly skeptical of campaign finance reform, of rules that allow for limits on corporate funding in elections. The worst moment in that, although there have been several bad moments, was Citizens United, where the court said that it was not corrupting to have outside corporate money in our elections. But despite this now 45-year trend, the courts have also been absolutely clear that states, federal government, localities have the authority to ban foreign money in elections. So I think there's a natural skepticism that sometimes comes up when you are facing a reform of the ambition of this, and it's an ambitious and important reform. But believe me, and I've got all kinds of critiques of the court on this area, the court has been clear. And it's an innovative way to approach this, but it also really flows from the judiciary's own logic. And of course, that's true. Like if you look at from the founding of our country, and some of you who are here and I have been at events before where we've talked about the Emoluments Clause and the other clauses designed to protect against foreign money in our elections, something that we have sort of finally ended the Trump nightmare of seeing the ways in which foreign money can influence policy. But there we have history in this country that goes back to the founding of prohibitions against foreign money in our elections, and a series of laws that have been upheld about that foreign money. So one, this is it's a brilliant and a key move. A second key point, and this relates to the senator's point about Seattle, which many of you may not know, is that after Citizens United, a lot of my colleagues and other people said, yeah, but corporations aren't going to directly engage, not the corporations. They aren't themselves, sort of tacky, you know. And even as you see the rise of billionaire super PACs, you'll see this argument. But we know that corporations will and do engage directly in elections. And we've just seen the beginning of the most blatant kind, like what we just saw in Seattle, where you see the very biggest corporation choosing to make a strategic choice to politically intervene to defeat council members. And so I also think it's really important to do this now, to nip that in the bud. Because once you have Amazon that has a political department that is organized and structured around winning and losing city council elections, that culture and structure is flooding from one big corporation to another. So we've got to nip this in the bud now and be very clear. Exxon, it's not worth your time. Uber, don't try it, because this is a ban. Because if we stop it now, it's a lot easier than after the fact. So I think that's a really critical moment here. Finally, the argument, here I'm a little bit, I know I'm speaking to the choir if you're here, but I just want to point out that the argument against corporate money and the argument against foreign money are very tied together. They're basically real and legitimate fears that institutions that aren't really designed to care about the lives of people in our communities are in our elections, trying to influence our elections. And that when you have the combination, when you have the growing percentage of foreign ownership of US stocks, I think it's about 1/3 at this point. When you have the profit maximization pressure, Citizens United, opportunity and examples, you have an example of a really fundamental democratic threat, where companies with, compared to most people, unlimited resources can sit and bring to bear on a state Senate race or threaten in a city council race. And we all know how politicians work. You know, the mere fear of having the engagement of some of these big corporations can basically make somebody say, hey, why am I going to even bother engaging in that? And it's one of the reasons I'm so glad we have Mike here and these fearless politicians in New York who have shown they're not afraid, but we have to build a system for people who are going to be afraid, because that's the way politics works. So I am just really excited about you all being here. Imagine it moving from Seattle to St. Petersburg to New York State. It will be a big national deal. And I really think it can change the shape of politics, not just in New York, but around the country.
Fantastic. Thank you, Zephyr, so much. Our next speaker is, as I said, Congressman Raskin via video remarks he's prepared for this event. And we're going to play those for you now.
Hey, everybody, it's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District, calling out to all my friends in New York, fighting for the New York Democracy Preservation Act. Good for you. I'm totally with you on this. From the standpoint of one person, one vote democracy, all corporate spending in our elections is a form of foreign influence and foreign penetration. A corporation is not a human being. A corporation is not a citizen. A corporation is not a political actor. Chief Justice John Marshall said way back in the 19th century in the Dartmouth College versus Woodward case that a corporation is an artificial entity, invisible, intangible, existing only in contemplation of law, and possessing only the rights conferred upon it by the legislature and not the political rights of the people. And yet the Supreme Court in Citizens United turned all of that upside down and transformed every corporate treasury in America into a political slush fund for the CEOs. So what's true of all corporations is doubly or triply true of foreign-owned corporations. And of course, there's not that big a distinction because foreign companies and nationals can own stock in in American-based corporations. And so this is an attempt basically to say, let's reverse things and try to restore the realm of citizen sovereignty over our own politics by repelling foreign corporate control and involvement. The reason why we allow all people to vote is because each person's share and stake in the democracy is equal, and each person's needs and values and priorities have to be equally valued. That's not true of foreign corporations that clearly have economic motives and agendas that have nothing to do with the interests of the people of our country. So congratulations on what you're doing, and we're going to continue to fight in Washington for democracy for and of and by the people and not by corporations all over the world.
We're thrilled to have Congressman Raskin's support of this effort in New York and around the country. I should have also stated at the outset that Congressman Raskin is a leader on this in Congress. He's introduced a bill on this very question of foreign influence corporate spending, and he'll be reintroducing it very soon. So our next speaker is Alexandra Flores Quilty, our campaign director at Free Speech for People, who will share with you how you can help get involved in this fight for the New York Democracy Preservation Act moving forward. Alexandra?
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. As John said, I am the campaign director of Free Speech for People, but I'm also a Brooklyn resident. In New York, we have an exciting opportunity to put elections back into the hands of the people with the Democracy Preservation Act. Corporations spend millions to influence New York elections and drown out the voices and votes of New Yorkers. This bill will stop big corporations with foreign investors from spending money in our elections and will unrig our elections. However, it will take us, the people, to make this a reality and to pass the Democracy Preservation Act in New York. We need our voices to be heard loud and clear by our elected representatives. They need to know that as their constituents, we want them to pass this bill. The New York State legislative session ends in just 4 weeks, and the best way that we can ensure the passage of the Democracy Preservation Act and put an end to foreign invested corporations influencing our elections is to contact our representatives and make it clear that we want them to champion this bill. The first step all of us can take is to join together tomorrow, Friday, May 13th, for a call-in day to our representatives. Tomorrow at noon, we are going to call our representatives, urging them to co-sponsor and pass the Democracy Preservation Act. Everyone who is tuned in right now via Zoom will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with everything you need to participate in the call-in day. For those of you who are tuned in right now via the Facebook live stream, we're going to be putting right now in the chat a link for you to sign a petition in support of the Democracy Preservation Act. When you sign that petition this evening, you will then receive a follow-up email tomorrow with everything you need to participate in the call-in day. So go ahead and click that link right now and sign up so you can participate in the call-in day tomorrow. We are so grateful for the leadership of Senator Gianaris, who has introduced this bill that will restore the integrity of our elections. But now it's up to us to get the rest of the New York State Legislature to join him and pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. So I want to remind everyone, if you have a question and you're on the Zoom call, feel free to put that in the Q&A. And if you have a question you're watching via Facebook, feel free to put it in the comment section and they'll move it over to the chat for us to see. So I want to just open it up first, a question for Senator Gianaris about this bill. Where do you think it's going in the legislature with your colleagues in the state Senate and in the Assembly? Sorry, you're on mute, so yeah.
Yes, I saw that. I can speak about the Senate a lot with a lot more clarity and confidence than the Assembly. I think we're in good shape in the Senate. One of the advantages of being the deputy leader is I do bring a little bit of heft with my proposals, and so we have a number of important sponsors on the bill already. I think we're up to 7 or so. And it is a priority of mine in the 4 remaining weeks of our legislative session to get through. So hopefully we'll see it start moving through the process imminently. And then it's over to the Assembly side, and that's in somebody else's hands. I mean, when Alexandra talks about the calls and the pressure on the legislators, that's where that will come in handy. And you know, if we're having a problem in the Senate, I'll certainly let you know. But I think that part, I could have greater confidence in saying I think we're in good shape on the Senate side.
Great. And Zephyr, what's your view on the impact this would have on the broader debate about Citizens United, money in politics, and all that connected?
I think it would be an extraordinary moment of hope, because in the wake of Citizens United, a lot of us, and we've worked together, have been pushing for changing the way that we fund elections, opening up a matching fund system, democracy dollar systems, and all that is incredibly exciting. And at the same time, there is this nagging anger and fear that, well, if we don't change the court, we can't go at the heart of Citizens United, right? And we are all in it for the long haul, for making sure the court reverses Citizens United. But this bill gives the lie to that. This bill shows that when you were talking about a bill that is covering, what is it, John? It's like 84% of what's the?
Well, 98% if you consider the Fortune 100, but yeah,
Right.
Over 85% of the Fortune 500. Yes.
85% of the Fortune 500. And that's what our fear is about. You know, we're not like that. The fear is about big corporations with big political teams who aren't working on making better shoes, but are working on reducing their tax rate at the expense of people, or changing policy for reasons that have nothing to do with the needs of the community. That's the problem with Citizens United. And here you have a bill that says, no, we can actually do something legislatively, constitutionally, even under this court, that goes at the heart of spending, not just increasing. And we need both for addressing Citizens United. We need, you know, both a more decentralized spending model, but we also really do have to stop this corporate spending. It's truly out of control. And we're still in, you know, we're still in the first 10 years. Don't think we're done in the levels of sophistication that these companies can engage in. I mean, there's other implications that I think are actually also really significant. One of the things that Citizens United opened up is the floodgates for corporations to do electioneering with their employees. And we're still also in early stages. That's connected to spying, but it's also like feeling free, like, okay, we can electioneer, we can tell people who to vote for and who not to vote for, which is really terrifying and dangerous for workers to have that kind of pressure on them. We got to put a stop to that right away. So I think the implications are enormous, because once you pass a bill like this, it goes right at what that CEO thinks makes sense to invest in, and whether or not you have an electoral political team that is focused outwardly and focused on your employees spending money in elections in the biggest corporations in the US, and operating in New York. So I think it would be a massive moment.
Thank you. And Senator, maybe connected to that, could you share with the audience and all of us what drove you to kind of introduce this bill and be the lead sponsor of it? What is it? I mean, you've got a lot of things on your agenda to be pushing in the legislature. Why are you leading on this bill as well?
The last 3+ years, I would say, I've gotten a real flavor of large corporations attempting to take over communities and control the politics of a situation. For those that may be unfamiliar, I represent the part of New York that Amazon wanted to build its headquarters in, and was very involved in the fight that ultimately got them to depart. But watching them shake down localities throughout the country with impunity and just say, all of you come to me and offer me your public dollars, even though I don't need them. This is the biggest corporation on earth, essentially asking for bribes to grace a city with the presence of their headquarters. And as it turns out, it was a sham, as we always knew. And so, incidentally, not to go off into that tangent, but they are now growing jobs in New York City at the same or faster pace than they had promised they would had they put their headquarters here. So all it would have been $3 billion of our dollars going to them for the same result. But be that as it may, as I started researching their influence over governments, I traveled to Seattle. I met with some of their council people. I talked about the influence they were having there. Started looking into, and it's not just all about Amazon. A lot of big corporations do this. They just happen to be the most brazen and the largest of them. And it's a real crisis point where we are losing control of our government to these profit-making entities who only care about their bottom line and their deep pockets. And that is not the way things are supposed to work. The Supreme Court dealt us a horrible setback with the Citizens United decision. And we're trying any way we can to recapture our democracy for the citizens and not for the corporations and not for the profiteers and not for the small handful of billionaires that seem to think they're entitled to control everything. And this was a really effective way to kind of push back against some of that influence and push back against Citizens United specifically, that I just thought was a very elegant solution to the problem we're trying to grapple with, short of a federal law or a constitutional amendment to overturn the Supreme Court decision.
Great, thank you. And Zephyr, you mentioned even with this Supreme Court with respect to this bill, could you talk a little bit further about the constitutionality of this approach? Why would it, in your view, withstand even before this current Supreme Court?
I mean, the most straightforward way to say it is that immediately after Citizens United, one of the big questions was, did the logic of Citizens United, which was grounded in a sort of series of different arguments, but one of the parts of the logic was people have a right to hear regardless of the source. That was sort of one of the pillars of Citizens United. So even if it's from a corporate entity, the listeners have a First Amendment right to hear that. And so some questions were then raised about, well, would that suddenly topple 220 years of case law, which has said, hey, foreign money foreigners do not have a right to spend money in our elections, right? Which was taken for granted for a long time, but then as legislation came up, was routinely upheld. And the federal case on that issue very clearly came down on the side of no. The Congress continues to have the right to regulate foreign speakers and limit foreign speakers for our elections. And just to sort of briefly say, if the opposite was true, then you could basically see, Saudi Arabia, Russia, pick your country, Qatar directly engaging in your city council races because they had a direct interest in congressional races because they have a direct interest in federal policy, like without such a limitation that would lead to absolutely absurd results. So it's actually been a deep, without going too much into details, it's a deep philosophical weakness in Citizens United itself that it doesn't grapple with the fact that, of course, we have to be able to limit foreign money in our elections. Like that's sort of the fundamental aspect of sovereignty. And if that is true, why couldn't we also limit corporate money? And Citizens United does not take that seriously, but nor does it do the opposite, which is to say, yeah, all limits are off.
Yes. And I would add to that, of course, that in 2012, 2 years after Citizens United, the court ruled in Blumen v. FEC that the longstanding ban, as you know, Zephyr, on foreign nationals having no role spending money directly or indirectly in our elections remained constitutional. And so you have this tension between Citizens United, which created this loophole that allows foreign influence corporate spending, and the longstanding ban on foreign nationals having no role being upheld. And Judge Kavanaugh, the DC Circuit, wrote the opinion that was upheld by the Supreme Court in 2012 in Blumen v. FEC. So we share the view that this is a constitutional measure that would withstand scrutiny even before the Supreme Court, and would be a critical step forward in the overall fight to end the reign of big money influence in our elections. I want to ask Alexandra, from the organizing perspective, what value do you see with this kind of approach in reaching people who are engaged in the fight against big money in politics?
Yeah, I think that, fundamentally, this bill is really about putting more power to us as voters, as New Yorkers. And so often over and over again in election cycles in New York, and I think this is only increasing, our votes and voices get drowned out by the flow of millions of dollars by corporations. And so this is a direct way in which we can stop our voices getting drowned out. And the most important thing that we can do right now in order to ensure the passage of this is by calling our representatives, sending messages to them, making it loud and clear that we want to restore the integrity to our elections, and this is a clear path to do that. And so I think that if folks can participate in tomorrow's call-in day, that is one of the first concrete steps. But we only have 4 weeks, and so there's a lot that we can do in the next few weeks. It's very, very exciting. We can lead the country in this really groundbreaking reform that can really set a precedent that I think is important for our democracy and the country overall.
Thank you, Alexandra. So just for closing remarks, Senator and Zephyr, do you want to share where you think we're going with this and anything else that the audience should hear? Senator?
Sure, and thank you, John. First of all, I just want to thank everyone who's viewing and participating in this. There's a lot going on tonight. And these issues, while of critical importance, don't get the front pages typically. So it's always been, we've, Zephyr made reference to the fact that when we took the majority in the state Senate 3 years ago, we have focused so hard on improving the democracy, making it easier to vote. We've really taken New York from among the worst in the nation to among the first in the nation for ease of voting, especially at a time when other states are going in the opposite direction. But it really involves rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work, because these kinds of issues don't drive themselves. They're very theoretical in some sense, right? You have to pass a bill that becomes a law that then says corporations that have a certain percentage of foreign influence can't give. So drawing the causality from the beginning to the end takes a lot of dedication and understanding. That's what we're relying on everyone who's watching to provide for us as you work with Alexandra and make the calls and tell people how important this is. The end result could not be more critical. It affects everything else. I always like to say, when we make reforms to our democracy or improve our democracy, it affects any possible issue you could care about, because that decides who's making the calls, who's pushing the buttons, yes or no, in Congress and elsewhere. And so we are working really hard in the next few weeks to get this done. And I do think it'll be a very big moment for the country when we get there. So let me thank you all in advance for your work to make that happen, and thank all the panelists for being a part of it.
Thank you, Senator. And Zephyr?
Well, I just want to say that this is one of these minutes where you got to back up your lawmakers. We got great people in there. And, maybe I didn't mention it as much as I should have, but it's so important to remember what the scam was with Amazon. That Amazon is basically trying to take $3 billion from taxpayers because it thinks it can. And we have to not allow that to happen. So I really, this doesn't have to be a fan fest, but I really, really appreciate Mike's doing that work, connecting the dots, because he's totally right. The democracy work can sound just less sort of immediate. But it will become very immediate in 2 years if we don't pass this. And then in your local election, whether you are in Syracuse or in Statsburg or in New York City, when your local election is suddenly threatened by foreign corporate spending, you want to know that New York has passed a bill saying that is not happening here. And that you can actually have the debate on subsidies on their own merits, on the merits of the jobs that will be brought, not on the merits of threats and a kind of effort to roll over. So please, I also have a lot of faith in the Senate here. Just to be like real about New York politics, you gotta make your lawmakers know it matters to you. That's the key, is you gotta let those assembly members know this is an issue that they're getting calls on and that they can't just scuttle. Because there can be a temptation to say, I like it, but not enough to get into a fight. So please, the 3 calls to an assembly member, 3 enthusiastic calls can make a difference. 30 makes an even bigger difference. But this is a time of year where people are not getting as many calls. Make them, and it can really make a difference for our democracy in New York and around the country.
Thank you, Zephyr. And the bill number, we should have started out with that, is S1126. That's what you want to call your senators on. And in the assembly, it's assembly number 7458, A7458 and S1126. And I'll just end, Free Speech for People, we're proud to be working with Senator Gianaris in supporting this bill. We were involved in helping to draft the bill in St. Petersburg and the one in Seattle. And we're very proud to be working with the senator now to help make New York the first state in the country to pass this model legislation. It's pending now in 6 other states as well, but New York is in the forefront. And Senator Warren and Congresswoman Jayapal have introduced this very provision as part of their broad Anti-Corruption Act, as well as I said, Congressman Raskin preparing to introduce it as a standalone bill. So it's moving at the federal level as well, but the states will lead the way on this, and New York can be right at the forefront. You can help make a difference by joining in this campaign. Thank you all for being part of this this evening. Thank you, Senator Gianaris and Zephyr, for joining us, and Alexandra. And thank you, Empire State Indivisible and Center for American Progress, for co-sponsoring. We'll keep fighting for our democracy. Good night, everyone. Stay safe.